Hey friends, DJ here, and welcome to the 8th week of Thrive. This is a series of conversations teaching our souls to thrive in our relationship with God and not just get by or survive. Can you believe it? 8 weeks in already? We're almost done. We've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes, learning about the big picture and perspective of life. And at the same time, we've been learning rhythms, practical ones that I hope you've adopted into your lifestyle, things that help us to connect to the heart of God. I want to review why we did this series. At the beginning, we said that our souls were built by God, but the bodies that house our souls, well, they are temporary. The thing is, we live in a temporary world, so our temporary world is always at war with our eternal soul world. What we learned is that our souls will be attracted to and their attention will focus on the temporary unless we train them for the eternal. This is what Dallas Willard says about this idea. It's not that we are wrong, but that our inner components are no longer hooked up correctly. The wires are crossed. Our thinking, our feeling, our very bodily dispositions are defective and connected wrong with reference to life as a whole. In other words, our perspective is off, and we need to train it to have the proper perspective. That's what these rhythms have been about. And today, I just want to go all in sort of reviewing and talking about perspective. This is such a key understanding in the world that we live in the now and the not yet kingdom. I remember going to a friend's house, and to get this idea, he and his wife had decided to paint a line around the entire living room. And then they put a little dot on one side of the line. And that was their reminder in their living room that life is about the line, and that line is eternity. And the tiny little dot, that represents this life. So, how do we train our souls to have perspective? Well, this is where we bring in the preacher. And all along, I've been given the really negative message from Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, frankly, is kind of a depressing kind of book. Oh, but it's so good when we can listen to it because it helps us with our perspective. Think of it this way. Think of on your way to do some really important things. You stop by the hospital room of a wise old sage that is living their last days on earth. And you're in a hurry, you're rushing, you're ready to get to the next thing, but you can't help but slow down and recognize this is the end for this wise person. And this wise person grabs you close and pulls you in and says to you, the most important things in life are eternal. Live for relationships. Don't forget your connection with God. Live for what matters. You probably feel a little disoriented because you catch that moment, and yet your brain is thinking about shopping for the day and the work project you need to finish and picking up the kids and taking them to soccer, and you're just like, how do I deal with the eternal and the temporary? This is the tension of life, isn't it? A friend of mine recently said that we need to live with a morbid futility. I looked at him sideways like, really? Do we really need to think about death and the fact that sometimes things don't work out the way we want to? He said, oh, yes. Because when we can accept that, it reshapes our perspective in everyday life. So here's what we're going to do. I want to just take a little step into how in the world would we reshape our perspective. And of course, I don't want to give you my words. I want to give you the words of the scripture. In this case, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes. And this week, I'm going to kind of jump all over because the ideas that we're talking about this week are found throughout the book. The first thing that is so important that Ecclesiastes teaches us about perspective is that we must accept that this life is temporary, but we're living for the eternal. Acceptance is so hard, isn't it? Acceptance of reality. You know, sometimes it's easy to just live in an alternate reality, to live in La La Land. But when we can accept life for what it is, we can get out of it what we were meant to get out of it. Listen to Ecclesiastes 11. It says this: when people live to be very old, let them rejoice in every day of life, but let them also remember that there will be many dark days. Everything still to come is meaningless, or smoke, or hevel. That word means a vapor. It's hard to grab a hold of. That is, the temporary life is going to be full of trials and victories. We can't totally count on it. So let's live for today. He goes on the next verse to say, young people, it's wonderful to be young. Enjoy every minute of it. Do everything you want to do. Take it all in. But remember, here he goes again, perspective, that you must give an account to God for everything you do. So refuse to worry and keep your body healthy. But remember that youth and the whole life before you is meaningless. Smoke, hevel, mystery, and enigma. It's so helpful to recognize that when we can accept life for what it is, what it can bring and what it can't, we can start to look to what really can bring us hope. And that is God. This whole life is about trusting God in the ups and in the downs. It's recognizing that He's in control and I can trust Him. And that's the second big how that we see in Ecclesiastes. It's all through the book, and it's called the gift of God. When you think about what God might give you, this is what He gives us. Ecclesiastes 3:12 through 13. So I concluded, there's nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat, drink, and enjoy the fruits of their labor. These are the gifts from God. What are the gifts? The gifts are what God has given you now. Now, this may be hard for you, and it's certainly hard for me. How do we celebrate and enjoy when life can be difficult? This makes me think of an analogy. Think about going into surgery. And you go into the surgery and you see the doctor. Let's say he hasn't put you under yet. And he's got his big scalpel that he's going to cut into your knee or your hip or your ankle. And you look at that scalpel and say, no, I don't want that. Because everything in us is trained to look at the moment and say, that is bad. It's gonna hurt right now. What a tragedy it would be if we skipped out of the surgery and ran out of that doctor's room. Wouldn't it be a devastating thing to not get what really needed to get fixed because of the temporal pain? See, when we think about the tension of how do we recognize God's good gifts when we're in the middle of pain, we need to recognize that there is a bigger perspective of what God is doing. And when we can trust that He's working all things, that's what Romans 8 says, all things to the good of those who love Him. We can go even into the most painful seasons, recognizing that we can trust the good gifts of God. Now, this is huge in understanding our life and understanding God. When we have a big perspective, it changes everything. This is what the Bible Project guys say about Ecclesiastes and this perspective. When I learn to adopt a posture of total trust in God, it frees me to simply enjoy my life as I actually experience it, not as I think it ought to be, because even my expectations of life are ultimately hevel, or smoke. See, this is what I wanted to get to. So much of Ecclesiastes, so much of what I've been learning about life is accepting the morbid futility of all of it, you know? And it's recognizing that the ultimate perspective we can push for is a perspective of trusting God. So let's dig one layer deeper. How do I adopt a rhythm or a lifestyle that helps me to have a perspective of trusting God? What kind of governor can I have in my life that will force me to trust Him and therefore recognize the beauty of every moment, recognize the gifts that God gives us? Today, I want to teach you about a discipline that you may not think is a discipline. You may think, well, that's too good to be a discipline. Good, that's what I want you to think. This is the rhythm of celebration, our 8th rhythm to thrive in our relationship with God. Now let's look into celebration. I find it fascinating that all throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the Jews were constantly celebrating. Jesus even commanded them to celebrate. I was shocked when I went to a Jewish Passover, and during the meal, we didn't have 1 glass of wine. We didn't have 2. We didn't even have 3 glasses of wine. You're probably thinking we had 0. We had 4 glasses of wine. Each adult, in celebrating what God did in the Passover movement in the Exodus story, celebrated by drinking 4 glasses of wine. Now that just doesn't sound like God to me. You know, that sounds like drunkenness. That sounds like, all the stuff that I learned that Christians were not supposed to do. Well, maybe true joy and celebration actually came from God. Whoa, what a thought is that? What if, as believers, we could be the most celebratory people on earth? What if the best parties were thrown by believers? We think of celebrations as bad, maybe, but I believe they can be so connected to our faith. And why is that? It's because the discipline of celebration trains our souls to have a perspective of trusting God. I'm going to say that again because I believe it's so important. The discipline of celebration trains our souls to have a perspective of trusting God. When I can celebrate in every moment, I can recognize that it's God who's in control and not me. That I can let go of all this trust that I need to have in my job and career, in my performance as a human being, as a successful individual, in my financial status. I can let all of those things go and I can say, whatever season I'm in, I trust you, God, and I can celebrate your good gifts. So how do we do this? I just want to get really practical as we close today. I think we can celebrate by the 3 M's. Here they are. We celebrate moments, we celebrate markers, and we celebrate monuments. So the first, how do we celebrate moments? Well, I already read, but I'm going to read another from the preacher in Ecclesiastes, what he says about celebration. He says this, "And I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun, but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him through his toils, through his days of his life, that God has given him under the sun." Oh, this is so good. To recognize that joy and celebration can become a rhythm of our life. For my family, we try to celebrate with joy each close of the day. We do this by cooking a good meal together and reflecting over the day together, whether it's been good or bad. We like to say it out loud. And then we love to eat good food and just recognize all of the good gifts that God has given us Often you'll find us at the dinner table thanking God before our meal. Not just saying, God, thank you for this food, although that's there too, but thank you for all the good things that you did for us. And every night as we move into a movement of closing the day, we try to intentionally remind ourselves through taking walks or sitting on the porch or just sitting down on the couch and talking, reminding ourselves all the good things that God has done for us. We celebrate by having a glass of wine or by eating good foods and just intentionally training ourselves to see that God has been good in the moments. We celebrate the moments. The second thing that I think is so profound that we can do is we can celebrate the markers. That is, the markers of life that mark transitions. Now, I've learned this from a lot of really wise people, but I've learned to recognize anytime there's a transition, whether that be a season or someone moving in or moving away, or just something significant that happens in our own life, in my family's life or in my life, we have learned to slow down and celebrate that moment. Maybe by going out to eat or doing something that's out of our routine, going on a hike or just experiencing something that we love to experience. But when we celebrate the markers, those moments that reflect or show the difference between one season to the next, we get this sense of closure, beginning, and this sense of trust that God's in it all. I like the scriptures that just remind us that God's mercies are new every morning. And that's a marker, isn't it? That every time when the sun goes up, it's a marker that, a new day's here. And God's provided it for us. Listen to what a Jewish rabbi says about celebration. He says, people of our time are losing the power of celebration. Instead of celebrating, we seek to be amused or entertained. Celebration is an active state, an act of expressing reverence or appreciation. But to be entertained is a passive state. It's to receive pleasure afforded by an amusing act or spectacle. Celebration, he says, is a confrontation, giving attention to the transcendent meaning of one's actions. I like that. I think it's so helpful for me to understand God in this way. The final thing that I want to encourage you to celebrate is the monuments. These are the big things, the big changes, the things that only happen a few times in life. These are anniversaries. These are moments that mark significant events in our life. I think sometimes these are even celebrating the difficult and hard monuments in our life. When we can celebrate the big things, that God is in them all, it changes our perspective. David Steindl-Rast says this: when you are grateful, you act out of a sense of enough and not out of a sense of scarcity, and you are willing to share. If you're grateful, you are enjoying the differences between people and respectful to all people. The grateful world is a joyful people. Grateful people are joyful people. Grateful world is a happy world. This is at the heart of celebration, is gratitude. And when we look at the monuments in our life, the big things, and when we're grateful for them, when we thank God for them, I believe it truly changes the world. It changes your world and it changes mine. One of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is a story. And this is a story of the ultimate celebration. This is the story of the lost son, or the prodigal son. And it's found in Luke 15. It details a young man who leaves home and he takes with him his father's inheritance. And his father was still alive, so this would have been a slap in the face. But he took the money and he ran. As a young person, he spent it in wild living until he had ran out of money. He lived a season feeding pigs and eating the slop that the pigs ate because he was so poor. And he came to this conclusion: I need to come back to my father. He goes, and while he's a long ways off, we see in the parable, Jesus says that the father runs to greet him. But that's not enough. The son decides that he has to explain to his father why he did it so wrong and help, just make up for all of his bad actions. And this is what the father does. It says the father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, quick, bring in a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. This is how God feels about you. No matter what you've been through or how you've lived your life, when you return to God, He celebrates because He loves you like this lost son or like a lost daughter. As you think of your life and you think of, how do I respond to this kind of love? Isn't it crazy that God invites us to be joyful and celebrate as well? As you think about the moments and the markers and the monuments, I really think these in terms of the daily, the yearly, and the decadely. Find ways to celebrate every day. This is going to be different for each of us. Find ways to celebrate each year. Mark the moments. Thank God during those times. And mark the monuments. Celebrate those monuments. Friends, let's be joyful. Let's be the people that know how to throw a party. Let's be the people who plan the most ridiculous parties because our perspective is trusting God. Let's be the people that can shout out from the rooftops, God is trustworthy. In my life, He's held me my entire life. Let's be the people that celebrate Him. I believe it changes everything for our world. Be blessed, friends.